Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, pronouns he, him, and I direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Wesley Brown's renowned book, Tragic Magic, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 94 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Whiten. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, authors like Wesley and Edwidge, we wouldn't be here today, and we are so truly appreciative of it. So, tonight I am thrilled to have with us Wesley Brown for the re-release of his timeless book, Tragic Magic. Wesley is the author of 3 published novels, a collection of short stories, Dance of the Infidels, and 4 produced plays, including Dark Meat on a Funny Mind. He is a professor emeritus in English at Rutgers University and has taught literature, drama, and creative writing at Bard College at Simon's Rock. He wrote the narration for a segment of the 1997 PBS documentary W.E.B. Du Bois, a biography in 4 voices, and is co-editor of the Methuen Anthology of American Women Playwrights, 1970 through 2020. He lives in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Joining him in conversation is Edwidge Danticat. Edwidge is the author of several books, including Breath Eyes Memory, an Oprah Book Club selection, Crick Crack, a National Book Award finalist, The Farming of Bones, The Dew Breaker, Create Dangerously, Claire of the Sea Light, and Everything Inside. She is also the editor of The Butterfly's Way, Voices from the Haitian Diaspora in the United States, Best American Essays 2011, Haiti Noir, and Haiti Noir 2. She's written several books for children and young adults, including Anacaona, Behind the Mountains, 8 Days, The Last Mapoo, Mama's Nightingale, Untwine, My Mommy Medicine, as well as a travel narrative, After the Dance. Her memoir, Brother, I'm Dying, was a 2007 finalist for the National Book Award and a 2008 winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for autobiography. She's a 2009 MacArthur Fellow, 2018 Ford Foundation The Art of Change Fellow, and the winner of the 2018 Udestat International Prize and the 2019 St. Louis Literary Award. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Wesley and Edwidge to the stage.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Hello, Wesley. Can you hear me? I can't. All right.
No, okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi there. It's good to see you.
To you as well.
The last time we spoke, I guess in this kind of book way, we figured was 1994.
Right.
Yeah, when Breath Eyes Memory came out, and we were interviewed on the radio together. So we're both a little grayer, and but I'm very excited to speak to you about the reissue of your wonderful book, Tragic Magic, which has this really gorgeous cover. The book was published in 1978, and you reflect a bit, and I encourage folks to read the introduction that you write about that, the rereading it, like the journey from 1978 when it was initially published, and you were prepared by Grace Paley to expect a kind of silence, but the book had wonderful reviews, and it was championed, and I think, and we'll talk a little bit more about your connection to Toni Morrison, but what does it feel like now to have the book reissued in this particular moment in time? There's so many examples I can pull out, and in the timeliness of the book, but given, even yesterday with the conviction of Derek Chauvin. So what does it mean to have the book out now in this particular moment in time?
Well, first of all, is having a book that's been out of print for 43 years to have a second life is quite gratifying. All of us can't assume that we will have second lives, but having this book come back into print is very gratifying. I guess in this moment, much of what Tragic Magic attempts to address are, I guess, representations of masculinity and how the main character, Melvin Ellington, struggles with the being a male, or the environment of maleness from the time he was, a young person, and how he's been shaped by that. So in looking at what's been going on in our contemporary world, that much of the issues that come up in terms of police violence against African Americans and other embattled groups has a lot to do with masculinity in terms of the attacks and the violence directed toward people of color, LGBTQ people, folks, women. And it seems to me that the novel attempts to address or dramatize a kind of toxic masculinity that holds sway over our country and globally as well. So I think that that is a connection that still resonates with us now, and I think with the novel as well.
Mm-hmm. There are so many ways that the novel links what you are referring to as toxic masculinity with the larger project of empire, for example, right? Because one of the reasons, the reason that Melvin Ellington ends up going to prison is that he's a conscientious objector, and that that he comes to that decision through a high school friend who sort of radicalizes him, and then when he goes to prison, he meets these different he has these different black male friendships, some and so one of the ways that I wondered how, when you're addressing what you refer to as toxic masculinity in the book, which is very powerfully portrayed, and how that's balanced in the book with these black male friendships, which are complicated both in from college through in the prison system, and then with Otis, with Theo. There's a whole list of black men that the main character encounters. How is that supplemented or complemented by the black male relationships in Melvin Ellington's life?
Well, Melvin is a person who obviously has grown up in a certain environment that is male driven, and he doesn't particularly have the skill set to become as a dominant as his more agile friends are. And so, not for want of trying, and he has to figure out how he can negotiate being in an environment where a certain kind of strength, physical strength, is important, domination, a certain relationship to women that is also connected to dominance. And so because he is finds it very difficult to assume these particular postures. He realizes that he is more comfortable or most comfortable when he can use language, when he can talk, speak. And that for him is protection, a defense. And the other avenue that he sort of finds himself directed toward is music, jazz in particular. So I think those two elements, both his gravitation toward the use of language and also the language of jazz, particularly in the ways in which improvisation draws him. And I think that those are the things that he struggles with. He is still complicit in his relationship to what being a man is, manliness, but he is struggling trying to discover how he can become some version of himself, or to imagine himself as a person who does not have to fit into these very rigid categories of what a man is supposed to be. So those are the things I think that he is struggling with early on, at least as in the flashbacks, and having spent this 2-year period in prison, he is still trying to assess what that experience has meant, particularly, as you point out, the kinds of men that he meets during his prison experience, and how what he does with those experiences in terms of the people he grew up with, both males and females, his relationship to his father, uncles, aunts, and so all of these people, he seems to go back and forth, trying to find somewhere that is fluid, where he's not stuck in any particular place, but he has elbow room. He has the capacity to define himself, to be ambiguous, to be contradictory, to be unpredictable, and feel that he is in possession of himself, regardless of his confusion or difficulty he has in navigating the world that he's in. But he is willing to take a risk to see or to discover who he might be if he is not as concerned with attaching himself to individuals who are trying to define him for themselves, and not allowing him to the room to become or to discover what possibilities he may have in being a human being who is male.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in formulating all of that you, when you talk about language, the language is very much alive. It's you said in the introduction that it's a combination of Miles Davis and Richard Pryor. And so it's the language has riffs. It's modeled a lot after jazz. How did that like logistically work when you started writing the novel, when you started taking us through the day of Melvin Ellington's release, and then he's going sort of through these visiting friends, going through these different experiences, but the language, it's such a big part of that, the riffs. How did you decide to structure it in this way that's so jazz-like, that even has models and musicians that he actually named, like Ella Fitzgerald or even Curtis Mayfield? There's like, there's so much music in the book. So how did you make that decision to pair that experience of that day with that sort of those musical elements and even structure the book in this musical way?
I don't think I made a conscious decision to do that. My feeling is that because jazz in particular has been so much a part of my life, that the language of the book, the narrative seemed to take on a life of its own. And that all of those things that have been instrumental to me in terms of listening to jazz for the better part of my life, then it seemed I was invited, so to speak, into using language in a certain way that was always there, but I wasn't aware that I was going to use the language in that way, or to have these, as you call, riffs, or these, as Zora Neale Hurston would say, these crayon enlargements of life, that it seemed to happen to occur because I was led in that direction. And so I would realize I was drawing upon language, the way people spoke, the Black idiom, but I don't think I made a conscious decision to do that. It seemed that decision was made for me as I wrote, and I discovered that these characters spoke and defined themselves in the world through the language and that they spoke, and I guess I discovered that along with them. So I didn't make a conscious decision to use that, the African American idiom or vernacular, but it seemed to lead me there.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the crayon enlargement of life, I love that expression. There is usually, when we ask authors, is this autobiographical, or kind of grasping and searching, but there are some actually very strong autobiographical elements to this book. You were, I believe, from what I read, a conscientious objector too, and you did spend time in prison for it. How much of the autobiographical element is there, and what went into making the decision of writing it as fiction versus writing, say, a memoir of that period of time?
Well, the autobiographical elements within the novel are there, obviously. I really don't have very much interest in memoir. I find that if I had decided to write a memoir, I would have been confined by what I would believe actually happened to me. And that doesn't give me a lot of room, because I would be trying to be factual, but realizing at some point that I would be distorting what I thought had occurred anyway. So I guess for me, the fictional urge seemed to be much more appropriate, because then I wouldn't have to worry about facts. I could, I guess you could say, focus on the autobiography of my imagination. And so in that respect, I can go anywhere. And I wouldn't have to be confined by what has happened in my life. I can draw upon elements, but I don't have to be confined to things that I believe I can describe as far as what actually happened to me. But, I think fiction offers me greater possibilities and room to not worry about whether or not what I am writing can be verified.
Mm-hmm. And so in terms of the process of bringing the book out the first time, I know folks would be very interested in the role that Toni Morrison played in the publication, and what was your relationship like with her as an editor?
Well, it was kind of a circuitous journey. The novel was originally adopted by Bantam Books, which was a paperback publisher, and Ted Solitaroff was the senior editor at Bantam Books. And I guess the way it worked is that Bantam would find a hardcover publisher, and then they would publish the book in paperback at some time after the hardcover edition. So in many ways, the discussions I had with Ted, were of a more technical and structural matter. But when Toni decided that she wanted to publish the book in hardcover, our discussions had less to do with form or how to structure the novel, but to how I was going to tell the story, and to be more concerned with the aspects of storytelling and language than structural issues. And so, as she has said often, that in telling a story, to be concerned with, is this a story that if I was a reader, I would want to read? And so that was for her the basis upon writing. Well, because this is a story that you wanted to read, so it was up to the writer to write it, as opposed to waiting for someone else to write it. And so those were the things that were most valuable to me in my relationship to Toni, which I think in many respects was much more valuable to me than issues of technical or form or structural concerns.
And was it, I mean, I always wondered what it must have been like to be edited by her, in this sense that to be a novelist, I don't think she had written yet, but did you feel a difference in being edited by, say, a fellow writer at that point than just a straight up editor? And maybe that has to do with those issues that you mentioned.
Well, I did feel more comfortable in my discussions about the novel with Toni, because as a writer, she would zero in on things that had to do with the importance of telling a story that matters, and that once you make the commitment to tell a story, then there is a responsibility, which also has consequences. And consequences being sending a story or a novel out into the world. And is this an effort? Is this something that you want to make the gesture to do? And have you taken the time and made a commitment that this is a story that you can live with, because it has value to you apart from it being a book, in the sense of, well, you wrote a book and then it's sent out there. But is it the experience of writing it? Has that been something that changed you? And do you find that by changing you, then what are the consequences of telling a particular story that you might not have wanted to tell because it is uncomfortable? And for Toni, which she often commented to me, is that the stories that you are most resistant to tell are precisely the ones that you should tell. And for me, in terms of Tragic Magic, the prison aspects of the story were the most difficult, because those were the experiences personally that I didn't necessarily want to revisit. But I realized that made it necessary, that's where the novel would have to involve those experiences. And Toni, was very insistent about being mindful of anything that has been a source of cultural or historical hurt, that it is important for a writer not to avoid or move away from it, but to move toward it. And even if it's going to be painful.
Yeah. Speaking of pain, it's a different kind of pain. We talked about the sort of the toxic masculinity of the novel. What about the women in the novel? There's the sister who just is just wonderful. Like, she just says anything, and is a very lively character. And then there's Geneva, there's the mother, and there's the aunt who speaks a whole other language that called Tut, when she's arguing with her husband in the way that he doesn't even understand what she's talking about. And that's, I think, part of the jazziness of the novel too. So what, and Alice at the end, which actually emerges as half of a very unexpected love story in the novel. How did you, what was your thinking about the women in the novel, given this, sort of this hyper masculinity, but also this young man, coming into terms of what kind of man he wants to be and what kind of relationship he wants to have with the women in his life? How did you approach it? How do you see now the women in the novel, and the women in Ellington's life?
Well, again, that was the sort of the development of the women characters was inevitable, and it was absolutely necessary. Given who Melvin is in his just ineptitude with becoming the kind of male or man that is conventional, that is prescribed, it seemed inevitable that he would have relationships with women who were more accepting of him and his struggle to become not a conventional kind of man, in the sense of the ways in which the male prerogative is dominant. And so I think that his relationships with women in the novel has a lot to do with their acceptance or being open to even dealing with him, because he is not as adept at being a man who is dominant, or who seems to believe that that a woman has a certain role to play, that they become in many ways surrogates for him to lead him into experience where what he thought being a man was supposed to be, he realizes that in the presence of women, that there is another way to be in the world, which is to acknowledge emotion, vulnerability, and being comfortable and not intimidated because of this around the women characters, because of the wish to dominate or be in a position to be in command. And so I think that the characters that sort of announce themselves for me and had to be women who he finds that he is closer to in his rejection or his struggle to be a different kind of man.
Phil, there's almost an encyclopedic, knowledge and appreciation of music in the book, but also film plays a really big role. I almost expected reading it that you might have like a sort of a James Baldwin, The Devil Finds Work kind of work on film somewhere. And what is the role of film, and particularly John Wayne, in this for you in this novel?
Well, in terms of, I guess, the form of the novel, there are, again, there's a kind of cinematic form that it takes. Again, not something that I thought about, but in the way the novel cuts to something that happens in the past. There isn't a great deal of transitional language. There's a scene where Melvin is, I guess, taking a shower, and he's immediately transformed into a shower in prison, and finds himself admiring the body of another man, and realizing that he is being, the man is aware of it, and that what can happen in an incarceration experience when you allow yourself to be drawn to physically to another man, and what could be some of the consequences in that. And so that scene is cut to from another scene where which I don't have the recollection of, but it is very similar to the way a film is cut and edited. And there's not, often in novels, there's an attempt to try to make a transition with a lot of what you might call transportation language. And I'm not necessarily interested in that. The John Wayne element, again, John Wayne is this icon of what it means to be a man who doesn't speak a lot, but only defines himself in action. And of course, having grown up in the 1950s and having a father who, one of the ways in which we bonded was he took me to see Westerns. And so I think that was pivotal in the ways in which he becomes a figure within the novel, and this effort to destroy the celluloid image of him through accompanying Otis to this place where all of the films are stored. And so again, it wasn't as though I decided to do that, but again, given the trajectory and the thematic thrust of the novel, it seemed that I was led to this iconic figure who is so representative of in this country, of what it means to be a man of strength, of authority, and where in his presence you have no alternative but to comply.
Mm-hmm. And Otis, who is really almost consumed by this figure. And I love the work of transportation. I think when I'm having transitional issues too, I like to watch how they do it in movies. Can you talk about, in the same way, this work of transportation in terms of transposing to writing, the role that the static so they go into a cinema, and Otis talks about the static, this sort of, it's not quite silence, it's not quite that the role of the static and how that might transcribe to writing.
Well, when you say static,
like they walk in and he says like you think it's incidental, but it's kind of the thing that comes before the movie. And
yeah, I'm not quite sure about that scene. Again, my memory of, I remember the sequence in the movie, but I'm not quite sure. Maybe it has something to do with the experience of walking into a movie theater and you don't quite know where you are because there is darkness, and you have to sort of slowly, guide yourself to where where the seating is, and then gradually your eyes begin to make a distinction between the screen and other, and where the seats are. But I'm not quite sure when you say static.
Well, Otis talks about, he talks very specifically about the static as though it's that sort of you transition from outside to inside into sort of like the world of the film. But we'll leave that to the folks to discover on their own. There's a lot of beautiful symbolism there that I don't want to spoil. But before I take some audience questions, and if you have questions, please use the Ask a Question button or feature. I want to close by asking you about the reading in this novel, because I feel like, I went, when I was rereading through, there's so many moments I paused, and even when you mentioned, like in passing, when Ellington mentions the Curtis Mayfield, we wore darker than blue, I went back and listened to that. Mm-hmm. And then he's so engaging and learned and has a bit in everything. And he's also, one of the things that get him through the prison time is reading. And at some point someone asked, what are you reading? He says, War and Peace. And they say, what is it about? And I was expecting someone to say War and Peace, but he said something like everything. And so what was the role of reading for you, like not just in that experience, but throughout your life and forming your novels and other books that are sort of definitive for you? I sense, that you've had a journey with books that have also spilled into your books. What was that has been like for you?
Well, I think my reading probably came after my experience with movies. And so as I assimilated sort of movie language and form, reading, I guess, in some ways became a kind of extension or co-companion to film, particularly in the way novels and short stories and would create images. And I guess that would be the relationship that I was most interested in as I began to read, was how the ways in which writers could find taking an abstraction and physicalizing it in the way that Zorna Hurston would refer to somebody has books in their jaws. And so you have an object of a book, but then it's physicalized in a way that animates it, where two things that don't seem to cohabit come together. So I think my reading experiences, or the books that I was drawn to, there was always, and my attention was sort of drawn to novels, poems, short stories, where they were very animated by the visual, and to try how you can make something, how you can be engaged by an image that can tell a story without having necessarily to describe something in detail. So now if you're asking, I guess, who are the writers that I was influenced by, or the writers that became important, I guess, writers such as Herman Melville, Stephen Crane, again, Crane in his very strong sense of color, of creating a story where there was all this excitement within the language. Writers such as Flannery O'Connor with this wild sense of humor and the absurd. And, probably against my will, William Faulkner and Ernest Hemingway. But I think that, and of course, more contemporary writers, I would say James Baldwin, of course, Toni Morrison, Toni K. Bambara, Russell Banks, E.L. Doctorow. I've always had an interest in how individuals are caught up in historical events and how that experience intersects. And I guess most of what I've written is very much inclined toward how an individual sort of is able to define himself, herself within the context of some larger questions of who they are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we have a couple of questions for you in the chat. I want to begin with this one. What do you wish this generation could take from the re-release of Tragic Magic?
Well, hopefully that the novel can speak to their experience and to see where it might be able to illuminate the present. Does it resonate in a way that can give some sense of what it means to live in this moment? I think the questions in the novel seem to travel well or difficult they travel difficulty, but I would hope that there is something that resonates in terms of language, music, that is engaging.
I think there's a lot that is very engaging. It feels, there's so much that feels familiar, but there's also a lot to discover in this novel. Our friend Mervin Taylor, hi Mervin, has a question.
Trinidad.
Yes. Hi Mervin, are you in Trinidad? So Mervin wants to know, and I'm glad he asked the question. I would have before the end of the evening. Would you say something about the title "Tragic Magic"? Is it what does it mean? Is it in Tut?
No, it is. Well, it's a street term for anything that can seduce you into a false sense of reality. And so the street term for tragic magic are drugs, you know. In fact, that title kept me off of a few juries. When they asked me what I had written, and as soon as I said that, and they asked me what it meant, and they said, well, we're going to exercise our peremptory challenge. So, but that's the definition of it. So I think that tragic magic relates to Melvin's struggle with trying to not allow himself to be seduced into a sense of who he is that is structured, that is confined, that doesn't allow him mobility. And he's looking for the magic, so to speak, in elements in life that are tragic. And that does he have the willingness to put himself in situations where he has to take a risk and to risk failure.
Mm-hmm. Another question from the chat is from Louise. In a general societal aspect, do you feel we are at a turning point? Do you feel that art, and more importantly, writing, has highlighted the struggle of people of color?
Always. I even in our at a moment when there is ostensibly not much time, or as much time taken to be still long enough to actually experience a book, and because of the velocity in which we live, where you can find out something online about just about anything, and that you can communicate with someone else or get information almost instantaneously, but that doesn't necessarily foster genuine communication. And I think any experience where you can actually experience something directly, which literature allows us to do, is valuable. And I would hope that that is something that's never lost. And that I would also say that the creative act of writing is always going to be something that is stays news, I guess, to paraphrase William Carlos Williams in his sort of definition of poetry. He says it's the news that stays news, and so that would be my feeling about the power and efficacy of literature.
Mm-hmm. And Sean, his question is: do you find any romance in the presentation of traditionally defined masculinity, albeit toxic? I guess the sort of maybe the Hemingway-esque masculinity. I don't know. Is there any romance in it do you find?
Well, I think there's that there's always some seductive connection to what is conventionally thought of as maleness, but it's something that ultimately I don't think is particularly romantic. But I think that most men, coming up, we have to come to terms with that, thinking that somehow a certain kind of prowess is something that we need to adopt. And I think Melvin struggles with the sense that that to be a man means that that romance within a certain kind of maleness means that you have to perform masculinity in the way that will attract others who will assume or be attracted to being a man in that way. So I guess the romance of that kind of Hemingway-esque version is something that is always there, but it's something that I think should be resisted.
And can you talk, this is from Julie Agus, can you talk a bit about your different experiences of working collaboratively in theater and of working in the greater isolation of working on a novel, and whether you feel plays and novels live differently in time and in relation to the readers or all of our contemporaneity?
Well, I would say that novels, that you are both the actor, director, the scene, the production design, and the cinematographer. You are in that. You have that kind of control, and usually novels can go anywhere. They're not necessarily as confined by time in the same way that plays are, because you have a stage, a proscenium, and my experience has been, when I decide or realize that a play is that will take the form of something that I want to write about, it usually has something that there is a sense of confinement in a room, or an experience which occurs during a short period of time, in a day, a week, and the circumstances that people are in terms of moving around also defines the form of how a play at least announces itself to me. And so that would be my sense of that. I mean, I guess if somebody would decide to write a play about adaptation of War and Peace, good luck. If it's taking a one day and the experience that someone is having in a single day, then it seems that a play can accommodate that much more readily.
Do you have a favorite collaboration that you've done that?
Well, I collaborated in this play about James Baldwin, that this wonderful actor, Reggie Montgomery, who has since passed away, that he had gotten in touch with me about doing something about dramatizing, the life of James Baldwin, and that we were discussed how we would do that in a way that didn't follow a kind of linear form. And so we talked about that a great deal. And I guess the collaboration developed to a point where that Baldwin's novels, the characters in his novels, would come out of the books, and the actors would take possession of characters in his novels who would be peeved with him about the course of their lives within his books. And so he's at a point where he's become ill, and now his books, or the characters in his books, are coming for him. And so that was what we arrived at, and that seemed to be something that we both found compelling, that was much more imaginative and allowed for a lot more room to not be guided by just and then this happened and then that happened, but to really make this connection between Baldwin and his imagination, and how those characters resisted his ability to control them. And now they were leaving the books and they had issues. And so that's how that collaboration developed.
That sounds actually scary and fun at the same time. The questions are coming in fast, but we're winding down. Speaking of projects, Indram, who's also a poet, wants to know, what are your current projects? What are you working on now?
Oh, goodness, I was afraid of that question. Well, I have begun writing, I guess, a novella about Miles Davis. In August of 1959, he was and his group were playing at Birdland. And so Davis comes out of Birdland smoking a cigarette, and a police officer says, move along. And he points to the marquee and says, I'm working. And of course, if you've heard the story, that leads to a confrontation, and Baldwin is clubbed by police and then arrested for disorderly conduct and assault. And so that is the situation. But I was interested in that year because it was also in March of 1959, the legendary, seminal recording of Kind of Blue was recorded. And also in March 15th, Lester Young passed away. And in July of 1959, Billie Holiday passed away. And so I want to see how all of these elements converge, using Miles Davis as sort of the surrogate for all of that. And also Miles Davis's, his relationship to women, which, as many people know, was quite brutal. And again, here I'm confronted with a story that many would say, well, you should leave that alone, because he had these demons. And here I am, I'm gravitating toward a story that is painful, but I think that again has drawn me to want to try to write a novel that is very specific to a particular time of some months within 1959, and to try to find out why it is that I want to tell that particular story, and what are the relationships, particularly the one that Miles Davis had with Frances Taylor, who was extraordinarily gifted dancer who was in the original production of West Side Story. And he basically wanted her to give up her creative life and to be a wife. And she relented to that. And it was took some years for her finally to leave. And there was, I saw an interview with her. She passed away maybe about a year ago. And so these are again, I seem to, maybe this is going back to some of the questions that I was trying to deal with dramatically in Tragic Magic. And that I know that Miles Davis is a very polarizing figure. You have this person of genius, and yet he is in many ways afraid of himself and has a lot of difficulty trying to navigate being an artist and also being a person who is has the ability to engage with others, particularly women, in a way that is not destructive, both primarily to them and also to himself. So, I've been told that if you talk about something that you're writing, you kill it. But hopefully I will be able to continue writing this, even though I probably talked about it too much.
Well, I hope I'm sure we didn't kill it, actually. I hope we our appreciation for you and for this evening, if anything, helps it to grow. We're at the end. I'm sorry I didn't get to all the rest of the questions, but are you having other events? If folks who didn't get to ask their questions here, are there other places they can see you online?
I'm supposed to be involved with a podcast with Dwayne Betts, the poet, sometime in June. I'm not sure exactly when.
All right, so they can go to your publisher, to McSweeney's, and I'm sure they'll update folks on what you're doing. But this was, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you so much to everybody for coming. We're going to turn it over now to our hosts.
Thank you both so much for a fantastic and interesting conversation. I cannot wait to dig into this book. For our audience, if you don't already have a copy of Tragic Magic, you can click on the green buttons of the screen. Wesley was kind enough to sign some book plates for us, so you'll get a signed book plate with your purchase. And thank you, Wesley, and thank you, Edwidge. Again, thank you to our audience for spending your evening with us.
Well, thank you, Sabir, and of course, McSweeney's, the Strand Bookstore, and Edwidge. This has been just quite wonderful having this conversation with you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank
Let's
you,
have more. Bye-bye, everybody.